So we're going to give you a preview, an update on Sonoma Valley Commons. Um, we are designing a brand new organization, and we wanted to keep the community updated about the process. We're not done. Uh, and I want to give you fair warning that this presentation is kind of more on the wonky end. We're going to dive deep into the details that we've been figuring out about what this new organization will do and how it will do it. By the time the broader community sees Sonoma Valley Commons, it will have a very different feel. It will feel more warm and inviting, and less about things like LITHC loans and ADUs, and more like a future for our community. So let's introduce who's here. Like I said, I'm Caitlin. I'm the director of Sonoma Valley Collaborative. We are a cross-sector coalition addressing the biggest issues facing Sonoma Valley using the power of a very broad consensus of members. And Sonoma Valley Commons is a project, an organization that the collaborative is giving birth to, that's grown out of Sonoma Valley Collaborative's work. And our co-host for this presentation is the Future Collective. Kim, would you like to just say hi and say what the Future Collective is?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kim Jones, and I'm the organizer of the Future Collective. And it's an effort to bring together and educate and organize a new generation of community leaders in Sonoma Valley. Um, and the people involved are really excited about Sonoma Valley Commons, and we're putting a lot of our energy and focus this year into supporting it. Last year, we were an event series, and we are sponsored by Catalyst Fund.
As is Sonoma Valley Collaborative. And I want to give a big thank you here to the people who've made Sonoma Valley Collaborative work, our funders, Sonoma Valley Catalyst Fund, Community Foundation, Sonoma County, and really important early funder and continuing funder is the Grabodi Foundation. And now let me introduce my collaborators on this effort. Julian, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. My name is Julian Mackey. I've been working closely with Caitlin, Kim, and Maria over the last 6 months as I finish my time, my master's program at UC Berkeley School of Public Policy. And I'm very excited to be joining the Sonoma Valley Commons as its inaugural executive director. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Maria.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be letting people in at the same time, but my name is Maria Saldana Membrilla. I am the Assistant Director at Sonoma Valley Collaborative and Future Project Developer at Sonoma Valley Commons. Super excited to be a part of both, and really happy for everyone who's joined today to learn a little bit more about all of the intense work that's happened over the last few months. So thank you everyone for being here. Which we will now begin the segue into where we started, where we've been since last fall. And I apologize if I have any small pauses in my presentation. I'll be letting people in at the same time. But last fall, as many of you know, and if you haven't, we really recommend you go and check out Sonoma Valley Collaborative's website and the housing affordability roadmap that was launched in late last fall. We found a few things in this journey. We were really hoping to understand the full landscape of housing affordability in Sonoma Valley. And one of the core things that was, unknown and a given is that Sonoma Valley is a highly desirable place. That combined with the lack of development over the last 3 decades has really created an exclusivity factor in the valley. And it has pushed the pressure of the lack of housing and hence the lack of affordable housing that we're seeing today. We found that we've got development happening in two ways. We've got market rate developers developing $1 million homes and in very beautiful places in the valley, beautiful homes. And then we've got affordable housing developers, larger scale developers building 40 plus unit projects using government funding, public and private funding for people that fall within a specific AMI scale, area median income scale, like 30 to 60% area median income. And we really identified that even though there was affordable housing developers working and developing a large number of units, we still had 54% of Sonoma Valley residents be rent burdened within these findings. Our median home price here in the valley is between 1.2 to 1.3. Those are the most recent figures, and they've risen significantly, 30% over the last recent years. And we really lacked an infrastructure to build for two things: the missing middle housing type and the missing middle housing income bracket, right? So 80% to 120% area median income is a bracket where many people fall in Sonoma Valley: working class families, nurses, doctors, landscapers, farm workers, and they don't have access to housing that they can afford. And we also saw that there was a gap in the development of small infill, small scale projects like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. And so, one of the initial thoughts of not only understanding the crisis itself, but finding and identifying the gaps was, where are the gaps that aren't currently, where is the housing that isn't, what type of housing is not currently getting built, and how can we support building that for our community? So, the lack of housing really affects our working class families, our Sonoma residents, longtime older residents. It affects our mobile home park owners. And the overall arching theme is that Sonoma Valley is definitely failing to house the people that make this community work. And the number one strategy that came out of the roadmap was the development of a nonprofit community development corporation. I will only mention this term once um, in this presentation because many people get confused. Oh, you want to build a corporation? No, we want to build a nonprofit entity that can own land, pursue projects, pipeline housing, identify and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and preserve deed restricted affordable housing as well. So, a housing engine that can support the work that's not being created. So, the roadmap launched 8 high level strategies. The purpose of today's presentation is to talk about the updates in Strategy 1, which is what we have been rigorously working towards in the last few months. Strategy 1, again, was the creation of this nonprofit entity. But the reason why we wanted to focus so much on Strategy 1 was because this nonprofit can actually tackle Strategy 4, 6, and 7. So preserving the existing lower cost housing that we have, the small amount of lower cost housing that we have in the valley, using the community land trust model or a cooperative model to be able to have community input and community ownership, and then focusing on workforce housing and ownership. We have some incredible opportunities that are coming up in land use policy in the county that allows for the increased number of units for specifically farm worker housing. We won't dive into that today, but we are very excited to see how this nonprofit entity can leverage those land use changes to be able to develop more housing. And I will let Julian. Oh, actually, this is still me. So once the roadmap was launched, we had four key goals. You know, we wanted to understand the feasibility of creating this nonprofit entity. Why do we need a new nonprofit? Why something that's standalone as opposed to a project or program of a different organization? Why reinvent the wheel? Well, it's because the wheel doesn't actually exist in this area. So within our research, we spoke with many, many, many other CDCs and organizations that do this work, and we found some really incredible organizations that started small and scaled to a successful standpoint. And Julian will be talking not only about the business models, but also the examples within that research. So we convened a small group of high-level experts, our incredible steering committee that we're hoping will eventually become our board at Sonoma Valley Commons, land use, finance, housing policy, and housing development itself. So our steering committee consists of these experts that supported us and guided us in this research, this initial research phase. And then the goal was to create business models, different types of business models that we will get into in today's presentation, but also that each business model has an actual budget towards it or a business plan, understanding the cost, the sequencing, the timeline, all of it. And then the final and most important stage is actually preparing to launch. There's a lot of logistical steps here that we have to take. Developing the 501(c)(3, drafting the board, drafting all of the documentation and paperwork that comes with creating a new nonprofit entity is in our prepare to launch phase in this sequence. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we conducted over 35. Julian did an incredible job at conducting over 35 intensive interviews, again, with housing experts, practitioners, loan funds, regional funds, and regional housing developers to better understand what would the best business models be for a place like Sonoma Valley. We talked to philanthropy, we talked to technical practitioners, and I just would really like to express a huge thank you to our steering committee who donated their time and expertise to be a part of this work, especially because they are people who really believe in the work that we're doing and they are super excited. And we hope that we can get more volunteers and more experts in this field as an outcome of this project and an outcome of this presentation even to be able to tap into connections and more information about whatever you may know and how you can contribute to this effort. So thank you to our steering committee. And I will transition it over to Julian now.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, a huge thank you to our steering committee. We have several of those individuals on the call today, as well as a few of the folks who we interviewed over the last few months. So we wouldn't be where we are today without their expertise. I'm going to go through the sort of methodology that we went through in this upfront design and discovery phase. I'm going to cover a lot of content. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And Maria will be looking through those questions, and we'll also have time at the end to answer what comes up. So when we look at the process that we took to design an organization, we really followed two steps. The first was widening the aperture. We wanted to understand the full spectrum of business models that organizations around the country were pursuing to address affordability in their communities. So I described it as, widening the aperture. And from there, the second step was prioritizing and determining which were the specific business models that Sonoma Valley Commons would want to pursue that would be most effective. And so to do that, we identified two buckets of criteria. First and foremost, we want to make sure that whatever business models this type of organization pursues is driving outcomes, right? It's creating new housing units. That's the goal here. And that can be either directly through construction or preservation. It can be indirectly through advocacy or infrastructure improvements. We also want to make sure that the housing outcomes that this organization is driving are aligned with the housing needs of the community. So being really mindful of delivering housing units that are available to folks at a range of incomes. The second bucket here is feasibility. We need to make sure that we are taking into account the financial feasibility of each of these potential business models, understanding whether there's funding availability. If we pursue some type of activity and there's no funding available, well, that's going to make it really difficult in the short term. We also want to think about the long-term durability of an organization like this. Equally important, organizational feasibility. This is going to be a small group, and we need to make sure that whatever projects we're taking on are things that can be realistically tackled by an organization of our size. And we also don't want to be duplicative of the many amazing organizations that are operating throughout Sonoma County already. So next slide. With that, we we're looking at the widening, this is the widening the aperture view. So again, during those interviews, we started by just documenting, okay, these are all the different models that we could pursue. And as you can see, there's a wide range here. We've found some organizations that operate just as service providers. They're using their expertise to essentially facilitate ongoing creation of housing. There's also organizations that were serving as direct owner operators. They were owning the properties themselves. They were operating these units of housing, serving as property managers, or owning any of these housing units for the long term. Similar related model is this community land trust model that Maria mentioned earlier. These are organizations that are typically include some level of co-governance with their tenants and are also focused on removing housing units from some of the market pressures that are making these properties less affordable. What that often looks like is an organization owning the underlying land and then allowing individuals or families to own the homes that sit on top of that land. The last kind of role we looked at were traditional fee developer. This is essentially, something like a Burbank or a Bin Pen, and how that typically works is they get a percentage fee of a specific project when that project is completed. So here's a long list of our really 12 models that we started with based on those conversations, and then the focus was on how do we then prioritize them. But I want to start by going over a couple key themes that we identified in this project. So we already talked about some of those structural challenges. I think those became even more clear as we went through this process, that Sonoma Valley is at some distinct disadvantages when it comes to qualifying for some of the subsidies required to make these projects work. Things like the distance from transit. We're not close to the 101. We don't have dense bus or train lines that would help us qualify for transit-oriented development, which is a major funding priority at the moment. Because of the wealth concentration, that tends to hide some of the inequalities that exist in our broader community, which means that some aspects of our community don't qualify for some of these economic development focused subsidies that are available. And further, the cost of construction, which is true nationally, but I think distinctly felt in places like Northern California, makes the need for those subsidies even greater. This leads us to the financing landscape. So despite those different challenges, financing does exist. We've seen some decreased financing at the state level, which then flows down to organizations like the Bay Area Housing Finance Association, or BAFA. However, there are still funds of money that exist. We have the Renewal Enterprise District based in Santa Rosa that has been really supportive of new housing projects throughout Sonoma County. We also have the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is based in San Francisco, but has been expanding their support of some of these affordable housing projects throughout the Bay Area. What all of these different pots of money require is an organization that's being proactive, that's serving as the tip of the spear and going out and getting that funding, getting qualified. But there are some risks. One major risk that we saw and heard from many organizations is that the reality in especially the early days of an organization like this is you're particularly susceptible to risk. You don't have a lot of financial leverage where you can take on a 10-year long expensive new build project, especially when units of new housing run around $750 to $1,000 to $1 million. Taking on a big project like that right from the get-go creates a situation where you might get marred, where you might get stuck for years to come and ultimately aren't delivering the types of housing that you want. So you have to be really mindful of where you start. All that being said, one of the key takeaways from this project has been that there are a number of really wonderful, successful organizations that exist nearby, as close as Napa, but throughout the broader Bay Area in places like Oakland and East Palo Alto that have come together, that have created community-based organizations that are agile, that move quickly and deliver really meaningful housing outcomes to their community. And so we've been able to base our findings on that work. So the result, Well, first and foremost, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that at the end of this project we would come to the conclusion that we needed a new organization, right? We were already working within the confines of Sonoma Valley Collaborative. There's other great organizations that already exist, but I think what we found through this work was that creating a new organization was necessary in order to move these projects forward. And so that new organization has a name, Sonoma Valley Collaborative, or sorry, Sonoma Valley Commons, which is missing on the slide, I think, because of the coloring. But Sonoma Valley Commons is a locally rooted 501c3. It will be its own organization. It's going to be focused on expanding housing affordability for workers, for families, for seniors, for individuals throughout different income brackets. And what's important here is that we will be driven and informed by the local community, and that we'll be focused on moving projects from concept to occupancy. So really, we're going to be doing the work. We're going to be focusing on delivering those housing units. One thing we want to note is that over time, an organization like Sonoma Valley Commons may do more than housing. It may do more than just build and protect homes. We may also look at some other community serving projects like creating parks, community hubs, walkable green corridors, and additional land uses in that way. One thing we wanted to call out is that Sonoma Valley Collaborative will continue to exist. There's a critical role that the collaborative will play in advancing policies through its members' consensus and focusing on infill affordable homes and keeping renters housed. So a lot of the tenant protection policy work that will continue to happen even as Sonoma Valley Commons focuses on delivering those housing outcomes. Next slide. So this is the drum roll. Our initial business models, these are the three first business models that we've identified as the priority for this organization to pursue in the short term. We'll talk about the long-term vision, but this is where we think this organization should start. And I'm going to go through each of these in more detail, but at a high level, acquisition and preservation, that's the acquisition of existing housing. ADU Navigator programs, this is unlocking ADUs for homeowners throughout the valley. And the last are joint venture partnerships, so partnering directly with existing affordable housing developers that are already doing work in this area. So let's start with acquisition and preservation. When you look at affordable housing, it's critical to realize that you're not just building new affordable housing, it's also equally important to preserve what you already have. 2.4 million affordable units were lost nationwide in 2001 to 2013. And often the cause of that is not demolition or something like that. It's just that the price of those homes, which was previously considered affordable, so it could be paid for, or the cost of that housing was equal to 30% of someone's income, then raises in price and is no longer deemed affordable. And what's a critical piece to call out there is that 75% of all affordable homes are actually naturally occurring affordable housing. These aren't homes that are deed restricted or owned by the city or public agency. These are homes that are often older, perhaps smaller, and so they're actually naturally charging rents that we deem affordable. And so there's a lot of work that can be done to preserve those existing units. A second piece of this that I want to call out, I mentioned this earlier, $750,000 to $1 million to build a new unit of affordable housing in the Bay Area. That's really expensive and can make an organization like Sonoma Valley Commons stuck in trying to build those projects. A more cost-effective way for us to access affordable housing and to hold it for the long term is to acquire existing units. A lot of studies show that this can be 25 to 45% less expensive, and I think that's a conservative estimate. So what would this actually look like for Sonoma Valley Commons? Sonoma Valley Commons would actually go out, they would pursue multifamily units, typically in this 4 to 9 range that I've highlighted on the right here, and would hold that property and serve as the landlord. Usually what you would do in this situation is you would then deed restrict that housing depending on the existing tenants. So you would preserve this as affordable for the long term. So I want to highlight two specific projects that point to the feasibility of an organization like ours pursuing this type of project. The first is Our Town St. Helena. Our Town St. Helena is an organization based in St. Helena that I was unfamiliar with before starting this project, but is, I think, a wonderful model for us to pursue and follow as we build out this type of organization. Our Town St. Helena had started initially as an advocacy organization, and then in 2016 decided to pursue some amount of sweat equity projects. And then in 2022 decided that the most feasible model for them to pursue would be this acquisition and preservation model. Their first acquisition was a 12-unit property on Monte Vista Avenue. They were able to acquire that property largely through a loan from BAFA, which is a regional housing authority. And they were able to afford it because they received a charitable sale from the home owner, from the property owner. And charitable sales are really critical in this model and are actually quite feasible, are quite practical, because a homeowner that can write off the charitable sale of their property actually ends up realizing in many cases, a higher return on that sale than if they were to sell it at market price. A second example I want to call out is Just Homes in East Oakland. This is a really small organization. They have one executive director and one part-time staff. And in last year, they were able to acquire their first housing project, which was a 4-unit property in Oakland. They are focused on housing previously unhoused families and providing supportive services to those families. And now they're in the process of growing their portfolio, and their goal is to purchase increasingly larger amounts of properties and build their portfolio in that way. So the takeaway here is acquisition and preservation is achievable for a small organization and provides a pathway for you to build a portfolio of properties over time that then gives your organization one, delivers a lot of those housing outcomes, but also gives you over time cash flow that can support the operations of your organization, as well as enough leverage to pursue other financial activities. So I'll cover this last piece of acquisition and preservation quickly, but what this would actually look like is we've already identified 55 properties throughout Sonoma Valley that meet the criteria that we're looking at, 4 to 9 units built before 1980, owned by individuals who are typically, small single families that have owned these properties for a while but might be looking to sell. Sonoma Valley Commons would reach out to those organizations, see if there's an opportunity for a charitable sale before then pulling the funding together. The funding will depend on where this property is. Whether it's in the Springs, then you might qualify for one pot of money. Whether it's in the city of Sonoma, you might qualify for a different pot of money. Largely, what's necessary in these sales is access to philanthropic capital that can serve as the equity, and also something called soft debt, which is usually funding provided by regional or state partners. That is funding that is forgiven over time with the requirement that the housing is available to low-income individuals. So that's an overview of the acquisition and preservation business model. I think that's going to be really a critical central piece to the organization's work. And the due diligence on that work will start right away, but it's unlikely, an initial sale would happen for probably the first 6 months. The second business model we want to highlight are ADUs. Now, ADUs, that's an accessory dwelling unit. Historically, these were called granny units. They've been the talk of the town for the last several years, in large part due to the state of California changing regulations to make it much easier for homeowners to install ADUs in their backyards. The interesting part about ADUs is that I don't think necessarily we've all figured it out yet. There's a lot of promise that's there. We see some cost savings in the types of dwelling units that are available to people, but we haven't quite seen an uptick. And as a result, we also are seeing a lot of different types of organizations. every ADU organization we spoke to was a new kind of ADU organization. And so our focus is on, okay, well, how can we provide unique value to homeowners in Sonoma Valley? What we kept coming back to are these three pillars of the ADU installation process. These are kind of what folks need to actually install one of these. The first is technical assistance. I don't know, I wouldn't know where to start in putting an ADU in my property. But fortunately, there are folks who do. The ADU Center, which was founded in 2020, and I'll cover in the next slide, is an amazing organization that already exists to provide some of that technical assistance, but we can support them in scaling their assistance to Sonoma Valley homeowners. Once you have the information on how to install one of these properties, next you need funding. Oftentimes, homeowners don't have the equity available to install one of these, and so they need access to capital. Redwood Credit Union has a ADU financing tool. It's structured similar to a construction loan, and by partnering with an organization like ours, we can enable them to expand who has access to that loan fund. The last thing we saw is that in the entitlement process, that upfront process, was often the most difficult. And a construction loan only covers 90% of the costs. So we still need to figure out how we're going to cover the remaining 10%, which is often the sticking point for homeowners. And if we go to the next slide, one of the most exciting programs we found was in Napa County, which is the Napa County Affordable ADU, the Affordable ADU Forgivable Loan Program. That's a program that was launched in 2023 and is now made permanent. What it does is it provides loans of $25,000 to $105,000 to homeowners looking to install ADUs. The range is based on the size of that ADU, so whether it's 1 or 2 bedrooms, as well as some of the property needs. Does it need additional infrastructure like a well or septic? And what they do is they provide this funding at a charitable loan rate to homeowners, and so it's typically a 3% loan, and then it's forgiven. It's prorated over, I think, 3 years, and it's forgiven over the loan payments are forgiven if homeowners are renting out those units to individuals making 80% or below, so low income individuals, and it could be a family member as well. But the idea is, how do we make sure that these new accessory dwelling units are actually creating new housing, which versus, I think sometimes what we see is they just become a guest room or a guest house. So how do we actually unlock that to increase affordable housing? Next slide. So again, this is kind of, I would say, within these different business models, is probably the newest models. There's a lot of work to do and figure out exactly where we would fit in. I think the clearest would be to partner with the ADU Center to expand their reach within Sonoma Valley and make sure homeowners have access to their services. The second would be to partner with Redwood Credit Union to expand access to their construction loan program. And so by providing a backstop to that loan pool in Sonoma Valley, we can actually expand their criteria. But what we're really looking at is potentially, how do we support homeowners in that initial phase, in that entitlement process, to expand access, to get people started. And in doing so, we might be able to tie those grants to certain affordability requirements, like what they've done in Napa County, to make sure that these units are actually being used for rentals. So this brings us to our last business model. And Caitlin promised that it was going to be wonky, and I think I'm probably the one delivering on that promise. So I apologize, and I appreciate the questions that are coming in the chat. The joint venture partnerships model, this is something where at a high level, an organization like Sonoma Valley Commons is partnering with an existing affordable housing developer like a Burbank or a Midpen. And you might wonder, okay, Sonoma Valley Commons is a small organization. What is it bringing to the table? What we saw is that I would say there were typically 3 ways in which some of these community-based nonprofits were bringing benefit to these partnerships. The first is through community engagement. acting as kind of the community engagement arm of the partnership, making sure that they were reaching out to the public, building trust with potential future tenants, building trust with the city, and increasing the likelihood that those projects would ultimately move forward. The second is in helping these larger affordable housing developers connect directly to funders. I'll get to this in the next slide, but our town, St. Helena, which is pursuing a joint venture partnership with Burbank, has decided to forego state subsidies for a variety of reasons, which means that they now need to pursue a fair amount of philanthropic capital. And so our town, St. Helena's access to funders within that community, within the St. Helena community, is really invaluable to getting that project to move forward. The third potential partnership would be, and kind of benefit, would be bringing something like land to the table. If an organization is able to acquire land themselves, if it's able to, being mindful of it being land that would work for a 40 plus unit affordable housing project. If it's able to entitle that land, suddenly it becomes a much more attractive project for some of these larger developers. And so we might be able to proactively position ourselves in a better way than we otherwise would have. So I covered two case studies in this next slide, but I think I've sort of spoken to them. I mentioned the Our Town St. Helena. After Our Town was initially focused on acquisition and preservation, they've reached about 30 different units of that variety, and now they're looking at actually expanding to net new development. So this first big project is 40 units with Burbank Housing. Another organization based in East Palo Alto is EPA Can Do. They're partnering with Mid-Penn Housing. Their contribution to this project is less of a philanthropic contribution and more of a community engagement, community development role, where they're really serving as the trusted partner within that organization and making it much more likely that this project is going to be successful in the long term. So what would this actually look like for us? I think this is probably, of the business models, one that will probably come to fruition more in year 2 or 3 rather than in 6 months, because it's about positioning ourselves in the community to be better partners for some of these housing projects. But it means building relationships directly with those developers. We're fortunate that we've had great representation on the steering committee and in the future on the board from some of those developers. And it also means being the ears to the ground and finding land that might be attractive for some of these projects so that we might be kind of early movers on some of those opportunities. Okay, so covered a lot there on our 3 business models. I won't be quizzing everyone at the end of this, but acquisition and preservation, ADUs, and joint venture partnerships. That's where we're looking to start in the short term. And Caitlin's going to talk a little bit about how that fits into our long-term vision.
Everything that Julian's been talking about for the last several slides is what we're showing on this slide as stage 1. So these are activities that make sense for a new organization, a small organization, one that doesn't have a financial track record, one that cannot attract huge amounts of capital at first. So all this research is really well spent. We need to make sure that the organization succeeds in its early stages. Once it's done that for a while, it can move on to stage 2, where we can look at projects that are either building or preserving larger housing units for larger families, for example, that can provide a wider range of units so that the range of incomes that makes sense for the people served can rise a little bit. So, our first projects might be serving technicians at the hospital, and the second stage might be serving doctors at the hospital who are also currently unable to find housing they can afford in our community. And then stage 3, as the organization matures, we can get into projects that can actually lay the groundwork for ownership, which, of course, in this country is just a major, really the only rock solid path to financial security for families over multiple generations. We'd like to help make that process happen in our community so that renters can move to being owners and that people stay in our community. I think I hand this over to Maria now.
Yeah. So what does it mean for us to be able to actually do this work? It means we have to launch. And we are currently in the process of doing so. We want and have to finalize these business plans and then essentially create the governance for the 501(c)(3), and focus on the marketing and branding and storytelling. We want to ensure that we are presenting stories, and storytelling is very attuned to our community. We want to not only have a range of a farm worker or a landscaper, but also a doctor, a nurse, a technician, a senior caregiver. So we really want to highlight stories of people who are struggling with housing, and then hopefully be able to become storytellers of all of the people who are being served through the commons, similar to how our town St. Helena is doing. And our next focus is really to just focus on the first stages in fundraising and actually engaging stakeholders to be able to participate, and experts who can provide some outside expertise that we haven't thought of before as a starting organization. So I'd really like to again thank Julian and Caitlin and all of the people who have participated, the Future Collective, our funders, our steering committee, for joining us today. And we really urge you to stay engaged if you're interested in staying engaged. We need you in many different ways, whether it's capital or access to land or property or even expertise. So please stay connected. Stay connected with us. And if you have any outside ideas that could really benefit us, or connections to people who might be really engaged in doing this type of work philanthropically, we'd be very excited to learn more and connect with you all. So we have a few minutes to cover some of the questions that are in the chat. But first and foremost, I would really like to open it up for anyone who hasn't said any questions as well, asked any questions as well, if there are any pressing questions. But I will start at the top with a question from Mary. Please identify parameters of short-term and long-term, weeks, months, and years.
Yeah,
Mary,
that's
do
a
you?
great. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maria. Mary, anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah.
Um, in terms of the launch plan here, there is an immediacy to this, but do you see the sustainability of Sonoma Valley Commons being generational? Do you see the short-term, long-term, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years? Julian, I appreciated what you were saying about the development of some of these things, the being 10 years in the future, and I know the Sonoma Valley general plan is 10 years and looking back. So I guess where does this fit within those timelines?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that short term here is probably in the range of 3 to 5 years. We'll start by focusing on the ADU programs because I think those are the fastest to pursue. And then we will focus on acquisition and preservation. The focus there is, over a 5-year period, if we're able to acquire 2 to 3 projects, so somewhere between 25 to 30 units, I think that would be a major success. And then you can kind of expand that from there. And I think a joint venture partnership model will likely wouldn't really come to fruition for the first 2 years. And then, of course, you need another, let's say, 5 for that project to actually pencil. So that would probably be medium term. So the goal here is following in the footsteps of organizations like MEDA in San Francisco, is starting by building a portfolio of acquired multifamily units that gives us that foundation. And then once we have a stronger base, it allows us to move into some of this net new development, which is where you're going to tackle much larger projects and larger unit counts. But yes, and I do want to highlight this is absolutely generational. I think that the focus here is on building a community-driven housing organization that can own and operate properties for, you know, perpetuity, right? And so we want to build a highly durable, highly but still responsive organization that meets those needs.
And now we have a question from Dan. Has the Commons discussed partnering with Cal Parks to allow air rights housing development on their properties near downtown Sonoma? Specifically, the Casa Grande parking lot and vacant field near Depot Park are ideal locations for seniors wanting to downsize. Dan, would you like to elaborate on your question?
No, no reason to elaborate.
So,
I mean,
oh, go ahead, Caitlin.
my understanding is that the parking lot and the empty lot, the grassy empty lot next to it, are full of Native American remains, and that's why there has not been development there. Um, it's definitely something worth exploring. I don't think we should hang our hats on that site too much. Obviously, it would be an amazing location, but those are very difficult uh, sites to work with and difficult landowners. So there's probably lower hanging fruit, not low hanging fruit, but lower.
Caitlin,
So,
Caitlin, I did talk to someone over at the Parks District, and they said there were no remains of Indians on that field.
so I think
Interesting.
yeah, I love this. I think one really high level role of an organization like this is that they will need to be really on top of all of the different, land opportunities that exist, be intimately familiar with all of the different multifamily complexes that exist in Sonoma Valley. We've already started compiling a list of many of those opportunities, but I think that if this organization is going to be successful, it really will be one of the, it will be an organization that is so detailed and clear of kind of the whole landscape of properties throughout Sonoma Valley, so that whenever some of these opportunities come up, we have a relationship and can move quickly.
And now we have a question from Catherine Fulton. Does this business model mean we preserve but do not actually increase the amount of affordable housing in these early stages? Or are some of these units converted to affordable by the Commons' new ownership? And this is in regards to the acquisition and preservation business model.
Yeah, it's just that I understand the other ones. In that one, I just wasn't clear whether when we buy them the way you were describing, whether you're preserving or whether it's also possible you're converting. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, you're really doing both. So, so much of the a huge aspect of the challenge with affordable housing and a number of affordable housing units, and I think this feels intuitive, is that as prices go up, you sort of lose homes that previously would have been considered affordable. And so, by an organization like Sonoma Valley Commons acquiring that property, we are trying to prevent that from happening. We're trying to preserve it as affordable housing for the community. We would also likely go through the deed restriction process. So we would actually place a deed restriction on that property. So then it is kind of capital A, capital H affordable housing, and would need to follow certain income guidelines. One thing I'll call out is that an organization like Sonoma Valley Commons has some taxation benefits that mean that because it's paying fewer taxes, it's more feasible for them to hold a property like the ones we're discussing, and maintain lower rents,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Julian, I mean, from a messaging standpoint, at a higher level, as you wrestle with these early years, uh, anybody who's lived here for a while has watched the crisis get worse and intensify. So in some ways, the messaging is we have to we have to keep this from getting worse while eventually making it better. But it's like we've got to slow the aircraft carrier that's moving and then get it
Yeah.
to turn. It's and so some of what's at stake here is actually preventing it from actually getting worse.
Hmm.
And
No.
that
Yeah.
and the acquisition preservation model does exactly that by not allowing a market rate developer from coming in, acquiring, converting, and turning and increasing the rents on those properties. We have a comment from Peter. Smart to focus on acquisition as a start, quick process, less capital intensive, stabilizes at risk of speculation. Existing housing, conducive to diverse range of below market household incomes and often located in good, well-serviced infill areas. And in the process, establishes these houses as permanently affordable. Um, One thing that is at risk with the acquisition preservation is the condition of the actual units that are acquired. And yes, it is more, there's a certain percentage of affordability to doing that versus a new construction, but it also could be that many of these units are not up to code, and bringing those up to code with all of the new regulations that California has could be very costly. So it is a risk that the Commons does have to assess, but in terms of actually looking at the numbers, it could potentially still be more affordable to do a program like that or an acquisition than a new construction.
I want to just point out something in the chat that Kim added. We are collecting housing stories. We really want to connect Sonoma Valley Commons, the projects it can do, with the actual people that would be served. And stories are very effective at that. So if you or someone you know has a good story to tell, we're looking for them. You want to put some photos and testimonials on the website. And if you want to keep up with what's going on, like if you want to see what the logo is going to be or what we'll also have a more formal launch event, please do sign up on the mailing list, and that link is in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for offering to help.
Yep. And from Ken Stokes, perhaps not yet known or important, but given very high traditional construction costs, does consideration of prefab or manufactured housing units offer a more attractive avenue to creation of new affordable units? The answer in short term is yes, but it's complicated. We are actually working with the Future Collective, who has a wide range of different experts, including architects and interior designers, and a higher level conversation of how we would want the future Sonoma Valley to look like. Um, your standard prefabs are at the design and view of its creators. So we are considering being a little bit more innovative in the design, and then potentially partnering with down the line a manufacturer who can create units that look good in the valley. But that's a very creative and community driven and inclusive process to be able to design those units, and how those units can actually be placed in specific areas that connect to green spaces. And so it's a yes, but it's complicated answer.
I would just add, I would add that, and we have Scott here from the ADU Center. Many of the plans that the ADU Center and others in the ADU space have focused on are modular homes because they can realize some of those benefits. And the county has pre-approved plans. It's one of the benefits of prefab and modular is you can have plans that are universally approved. And then in the long term, once the Commons is actually pursuing its own development, I imagine that some of these prefab components will be really attractive, just because construction costs are really high. And I think that's probably the most compelling way to save money is some of these prefabrication efforts. Catherine actually sent me an article about this yesterday. And then quickly, I just wanted to address Patricia's comments. And I think that the city's acquisition of the 17 or 18 affordable housing units last year is still makes me excited because I think was such a fantastic partnership between the city, between Burbank, and between BAFA. But it required the city and as well as individuals from Burbank to work so hard on getting all of that funding and getting that application in. So you really need someone to be kind of the coordinator and exactly right that Sonoma Valley Commons would kind of play that role in being that. We've used different terms: quarterback, producer, showrunner, but either way, the type of entity that's really driving these projects forward. So I know we're at time. It's 11 a.m. I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined. We're really excited to share all this great progress and really excited to and thankful for all the experience or expertise we've gotten so far and excited to work with this group and keep everyone updated. So please fill out the mailing list form, reach out if you have any questions, and we're looking forward to these future conversations.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.